So we'll make a start. Thank you for being here. You're right. This is the session to be at because it's not too hot. We'll try and survive. What we can say is we're going to be debating a subject that's a bit complicated, and it's certainly reflecting what we are living today. We're going to be talking about capital, labor, and progress, because progress can modify the distribution between capital and labor. We know that it's a subject that is certainly of concern for citizens. And then there's the question of productivity, which is also a subject that is dear to the heart of Patrick Artus. So very quickly, Patrick Artus, you are very familiar with him. Esther DUFLO, who's joined us. Hello, Esther. So Nobel Prize for Economics. So she is our Nobel Prize winner. Next to her, we have a key person, and that is Pierre-Olivier GOURINCHAS, senior economist at the IMF. We've got two industrial representatives. So we've got Jean-Pierre CLAMADIEU to tell us about reality. So he is the chair of the board of directors of ENGIE, and we have Florent, who is the CEO of Michelin. So in these two sectors, lots of things are happening. So before we launch the round table, let's just go around the table to see the kind of climate that you are in. Are you worried? So the climate is slightly different this year. That's my feeling. There's a sense of concern. Do you share that with us? Well, there's some plus points, some minus points. There are some major technical progresses that are really upsetting prospects for innovating. And then there's a geopolitical environment that is not at all great for economic development. And then there's a situation in France, which is also of major concern. We've got a form of immobilism that's not really adapted to the current circumstances. Yes, we'll come back to that. Jean-Pierre CLAMADIEU. Yes, I was going to suggest three stages to go around the world. So the United States, a high level of uncertainty, especially in our profession. So we could have invested in energy transition, and it was working very well. And then Trump arrived, and this undermined everything and generated customs tariffs. And then we have all of this uncertainty, and that is not favorable to investment. ENGIE is being very cautious about what it's doing in the United States. Europe, we're convinced that it's important to be on the trajectory of 50% reduction of emissions by 2030. We've got to green the production of electricity. 45% of electricity produced in Europe last year was based on renewable sources. We'll be at 60% in 2030, and the projects are well underway. So that trajectory is ensured. There's a lot more to question between 2030 and 2040. There are bricks in place, though. And the last step concerns China. There, the dynamics in terms of transition are very strong. The renewable capacities connected last year were mainly took place in China. Today, there's a disconnection between economic growth and the emissions of CO2. And China has been able to make energy transition a part of its policies, and even in its aggressive approach to the automotive sector. So there is a contrasting picture. There's a false debate about renewables that we've been hearing about in France. In France, we need to develop all sources of decarbonated energies. Yes, I imagine that you don't agree with Bruno Retailleau, but that's another debate. So, Pierre-Olivier, tell us your point of view. So our last projection was in April after the shock of the customs tariffs imposed by the American administration. And at that time, we were very worried. The rest of the world was worried about what was going to be happening. I think what we're seeing at the moment is that we've got these tariffs that are lower than what was announced in April. So from that point of view, the shock is perhaps not as bad as it might be. This is something that can be seen in the American growth figures that are still very high. It's also something that can be seen. There's a second development that's new, and it's what's happened on the exchange markets. The dollar's gone down in value, and compared with the Chinese currencies, so the United States and China are benefiting from the devaluation of their money, and this should help them to grow a little bit faster compared with the countries in the Eurozone or the rest of the world. So it's a currency that's become a bit more expensive. So there's a contrasting evolution in a climate that is highly uncertain. So just to say, Pierre-Olivier GOURINCHAS, is France under the umbrella of the FMI, of the IMF? On the 15th of July, we know that François Bayrou will be proposing something. What are you expecting from that? Do you agree? It's not for straight away, being under the sponsorship of the IMF. Well, it's what you said earlier on, Hedwige. It's not tomorrow or after tomorrow that this will happen. We have to have a correction of the budgetary trajectory. It's absolutely essential. The laws of gravity apply to France as well. We have to adapt. We can't fly. We've got to be able to land, and we've got to see where we're landing. Okay, Esther DUFLO, how do you see things? You've worked a lot on developing countries. How are you perceiving these countries that we're not hearing about anymore? Well, I would say that since the COVID crisis, we've had crisis after crisis in these developing countries. There wasn't the possibility for these developing countries to benefit from the support programs that were available in the United States and Europe. So there was tax support. So poor countries spent 2% of their GDP, and therefore being able to catch up after the COVID crisis took a lot longer. And then there was inflation, the increase in food prices, and this was quite considerable in poor countries. And then there's the debt crisis. So we were in a very positive dynamic movement until COVID, and since COVID, it's like a truck that's, it's driving backwards and then it's moving forward slightly. So there's been the dismantling of the US aid organization, and then budgets that are being cut, and threats on trade are appearing. And so the environment, our prognosis cannot be very favorable. Yes, it's worrying. Patrick ARTUS, and then we'll talk about productivity, and then thank you for saying something. I think the concerns are quite clear. The customs tariffs, even if they're not as high as they were supposed to be, so a number of countries are in recession because of them. Canada, Mexico. There's a very negative effect on major commercial partners that the United States has. And Europe, the situation is uncertain. I can't see Europe going backwards in terms of its health structure or other structures. So there's a certain amount of uncertainty. Then there's uncertainty in terms of public indebtedness in the United States, in France, in Germany as well, in Japan. And this concern can bring interest rates up. So I don't think that Pierre-Olivier will be able to do something quickly in the IMF. But we will have to face budgetary restrictions because of this situation. So what about productivity then? This microphone doesn't seem to work very well. Well, the productivity, why is it declining everywhere, notably in France? We said that if the number of hours worked was lower than in other countries, it wasn't a problem because we had a very good level of productivity, but this is no longer the case now, is it? No, we mustn't confuse the level of productivity and the growth of productivity. France still has a level of productivity that is high. Now, we know, of course, that the United States are seeing productivity gains that are lasting and are higher. We see this in the Draghi report, in the State report. So there's a difference between the United States and Europe. There are causes, country by country. In France, for example, we've said that the development of apprenticeship was not good for productivity. And I won't go into the details of the specific causes. The global causes of the decline in productivity that costs 2 growth points in Europe compared with the United States every year. So that's quite considerable. And productivity in all of Europe has been stagnating since 2017. So that's not the COVID effect. It predates COVID. And then the causes, there are multiple causes. And there's the responsibility of employees. There's a high rise in absenteeism in companies, and that's bringing productivity down. Then there's the responsibility of companies themselves. European companies are not really spending much on research and development compared with the United States, 50% less. And then there's a strong correlation between the level of R&D expenditure and productivity gains. Thirdly, there's the over-dimensioning of the technological sector in Europe. It's half as big as in the United States in Europe. And the essential causes, well, first of all, there's the lack of contacts between research and companies. There's a lot of academic research that shows that European fundamental research is just as good as fundamental research in the United States, but the development of products is being carried out in the United States. That's the first cause. And then the second cause, there's the underdevelopment of venture capital. 22 billion euros was raised for venture capital in Europe last year. 250 billion was the figure in the United States. So we know that the heads of startups, when they come and they're unicorns, they will be financed in the United States. So it's all of these causes that are being built up. Now, just a word about what happens when there are no more productivity gains. Well, this triggers a conflict in terms of income distribution. This is clear in Europe. If you look at the margin rates of European companies, they're higher today than in 2018. If you look at the purchasing power of European households, it's gone up by 11% between 2018 and now. So the only loser is the absence, in terms of absence of productivity, is Europe. European states have increased their public deficit, especially France. And so we've got households, companies who have been impacted. And if we'd had 2% of productivity gains in 2018, the situation might have been different, and we might have had value to share between all of these economic players. So what do we have to do? Do we have to get rid of people, of people being allowed to take time off for illness? Well, we have got to try for more growth first and foremost. I am not for policies for bringing down public spending. So we've got the problem is that we don't have enough money coming in. Now, if you start talking about a tax, well, this, I think some people will not be in agreement. So we don't have enough tax income. It's not a French phenomenon. It's something that we see in Spain, in other countries. So the first priority is really to increase employment rates. So we've got to train senior members of the population. We've got to organize vocational training for the less qualified. Thank you. I'm feeling that there is some tension on the right-hand side of me. So Esther DUFLO, I'd like to talk about things with you. Productivity is maybe not your subject, so progress can make it possible to do many things. It can allow for a better distribution between capital and labor. It can allow for transfer of wealth. How do you see this notion of progress in relation to capital and labor? Well, perhaps we can start with productivity, that notion first. It's very difficult to measure productivity, especially today, And that's because part of the productivity is measured in a monetary way, and part of the productivity translates the increase in margins, an increase in margins that might correspond to a real value that is given to people who buy things or not. It might correspond to something else. So what we're observing in the United States, for example, where there's been a lot of growth, we saw a lot of growth in terms of capital in GDP, huge growth with a decrease in terms of work, and huge increases in inequalities and increase in margins. Productivity might be overestimated or underestimated in level and growth. There are sectors that don't have traded products like Facebook. They're not directly part of GDP, so it might be underestimated or overestimated, because everything can be thought of in terms of profit and income, but then some of the value is not measured. When you look at a sector like health, for example, it's a question, and you think about progress. Obviously we want people who are in good health who don't die. So the United States, from that point of view, is less attractive. Because even if we stop before COVID, the life expectancy is not going up in the United States. The average mortality age is going down, whereas spending on health is going up. When we look at a sector, an explicit sector like health, we might say that the comparison is not very clear between the United States and Europe. And this is linked with the notion of progress. What do we want to obtain? That's the question. What is the aim of the economy? Well, the economy is not just GDP. It's happiness or well-being. When we see that the United States, in spite of spending, it's not producing people who are in good health. It's producing people who are dying younger and younger. There's obviously a fundamental problem in the way the country and the society is organized. And there's something else. If there is an increase in productivity, and we're seeing that in certain sectors, and this is what Patrick ARTUS said, there's the link between fundamental research and applied research, and in particular because of a budget that is huge for research and has been huge since the 1950s. And then there's a trade sector, non-trade sector link that is very powerful with the universities, with hospitals, and that has led to very clear progress, whether we're talking about the COVID vaccine or artificial intelligence. Now, that sector, that's the sector where the Trump administration that's the sector that Trump is trying to hurt. He's trying to make it disappear. When we see the beautiful bill, it's about really reducing the tax income it's reducing income, and reducing the non-trade sector. And there are certain things that can't be changed, obviously, like the army. But it's this effort that has been implemented, and that's why profits are going to be going up. So we're going to remove that sector, that non-trade sector, and do everything from a capitalistic point of view. Now, that was not the driving force of economic growth either in the United States or in Europe until this day. Now, in terms of the economic climate, things are very worrying, and the future for the United States is really quite troubling, not because we're going to be increasing the debt, but because we're also removing the key to the engine that made it possible in the United States to have growth. So where does this leave Europe? Well, I think there's a huge opportunity for Europe. We should try and do things properly. The United States stole our research sector after the war. Now let's take it back. But it's not going to be done thanks to hundreds and millions of euros. We're going to need a lot more money than that. And I'm very happy to talk about tax income. So this happened in the United States and Europe thanks to a fundamental public research sector that was powerful. And a lot of the improvements to hospital, that's a non-trading market, was thanks to energetic tax systems to make sure that there was enough money to finance the sector which has a long-term perspective. And this is going to become even more important with the transition-focused approaches, and then, of course, there are the short-term prospects of people in business. So coming back to tax systems, do you think that if we made taxes even heavier for certain agents, and we won't name them, do you think that that might encourage this progress, this productivity in the long term? Well, it's clear that we've got a big problem when it comes to progress of tax, at the top of the pyramid for companies. Now there's the OECD agreement about the minimum taxes for companies that's been introduced. Then there's the agreement between the G7 organization and the Trump administration. But before that agreement, there was a big problem. There was a big problem when it came to tax income from the biggest multinationals, not just in France, but across the world. There was a big problem with respect to the progress of tax right at the top there. So billionaires. So the man tax is one way to answer that, but it has to be coordinated. It would be good if it were coordinated at global level, but because lots of people think that, say it can't work if it's not at global level, but some people believe that it can be at European level. But obviously, I think it would be possible to do it at European level. There aren't very many millionaires. I think it's perfectly possible. Sorry, I understood the opposite. Most millionaires don't want to move to the United States. So people will stay here, even if they have a 2% tax on their fortune every year. So experiments carried out, introduction, removal of progressive taxes for the wealthier in Scandinavian countries show that people don't move. So we'll see whether companies move or not. We'll ask our neighbors in just a while. So do you think that we can have a proper assessment of productivity, and what consequence does this have on the economy? Well, this is the real question. The growth of productivity is what conditions improvements to standards of living. Esther is right. There are other dimensions with respect to quality of life. It's not just about measuring productivity of trade, but the correlation is so strong, and it concerns longer-term periods. Therefore, it's the key to many of the problems that we're having to face. The first point that I would like to make is that it's very difficult to measure productivity, as Esther said. It's very difficult to measure it in the short term. There are many things happening that are polluting our measures of productivity. There are cyclical effects. So we're coming out of crisis periods with COVID, with the energy crisis. During COVID, we kept employees inside companies, even though they weren't producing, and of course productivity collapsed. It was purely mechanical. If you're not producing, there are employees in the United States who were let go of. But it's just cyclical. The shocks, the crises are so big that this distorts measurements. So we've got to really take a step back. We've got to look at things from hindsight. And when we take a step back, and this is illustrated in different reports, whether we're talking about the Draghi report, the State report, or whatever, the verdict is absolutely without doubt. Productivity is declining in Europe in relation to the United States. And it's not just since 2017, it's been since 2010. Since the middle of the 90s, this is when things started to be generated. We could see things in detail. So Europe had to catch up, but the machine was a bit rusty. In the 90s, we never managed to get back to where we were, to the low flow level. And we had the impression that things deteriorated. Perhaps it's worse now than it was then. So that's the question that should draw the attention of policymakers, politicians in Europe, what should we do in order to get the machine back up and working? So why was it rusted, the machine? Why was it not working? Well, when we looked at things in detail, when we compared countries, we looked at things, the FMI looked at things in detail. Well, the thing is that we saw a slowdown everywhere when we looked at things, not just to European Union countries. So productivity goes down everywhere, but a little bit more in European countries. Now, the first reason for this was that it was linked to the wrong attribution of resources. To have productivity, the right employees have to be in the right place along with the capital. And that's something that deteriorated in many countries, in the European zone, for example, but not in the United States. So this created friction on the labor market, on the goods market, on the capital market. It created friction between countries in the European zone. The single market was not working properly. The resources were not going to the right places, and this was a factor that led to a drop in productivity. The second point that I'd like to mention is that when we look at the situation, well, we need to look at the technology sector. It's not just about innovation. It's not just the fact that we didn't have the GAFAs in Europe, that we didn't have Apple, we didn't have Amazon or Google. It's because when you look at the 90s, it's the adoption of technologies, communication and information and communication technology. It's the way companies brought these tools in order to improve productivity inside their processes. This took place at a much slower rate compared with the United States. So it wasn't a question of which company is going to create products, it's how these are going to be spread. So there were delays, and a lot of research was presented recently that was very interesting. So at the Sintra conference, the Central European Bank, so Benjamin Chauffeur showed that the technology adoption rate that improves productivity in companies is much lower in countries with forms of labour that are more rigid, that have welfare. There is a certain resistance to the adoption of these technologies in countries that are more protective. And then there's the finance sector. We can see the paradox of Europe is that we've got human capital, we've got a lot of researchers, they're very good, we've got a lot of capital. Generally speaking, it's not a huge region, but the European Union has an excess of savings, and the savings are exported. So we've got capital, we've got human capital, and we can't bring them together to make innovation and productivity come true. And that's the wager ahead of us in Europe.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I was listening to you. It's very interesting, those works by Benjamin Chauffeur, who's an economist. We're going to get back to this in a minute, but we're going to continue our roundtable with Jean-Pierre Clamadieu. Jean-Pierre Clamadieu, it's interesting to see the productivity that depends mostly on the allotment of capital. You are in a position, ENGIE, in a job. ENGIE is coming from a historic company, but it's also a job that is fairly recent, the ecological transition. It's a phenomenon that dates maybe, 10 years ago? So you need for this progress a lot of capital. You need a lot of capital. How do you manage this allotment of capital, and how do you get the productivity? What I'm going to say is going to illustrate what my neighbor said. We're in a job where investment that is required is massive. A group like ENGIE invests every year 8 billion euros. It's a pretty big amount of money in the various aspects of the ecological transition, production of decarbonated energy, transport, providing of this energy to the public. So for us, the challenge of the efficiency of this investment is very important. We developed in the group the smart electron concept, which means that we're trying to produce decarbonated electricity whenever it's needed and when it's needed. We know that in a sunny day, at noon, the production system is going to be so efficient that we don't need extra capacity. So we bring solutions throughout storage. It's massive progress in the job. In 10 years, we divided by 10 the cost of PV. In 10 years, we divided by 3 the cost of a windmill. Yeah, but less than the Chinese. That's what you said, though. Yeah, but we need to, on this topic, to find with China an agreement between Europe and China to benefit from these technologies. And on the batteries, in 18 months, we divided the cost by 2. So for us, the efficiency of the investment is key, and the rigidity and the complexity of the regulation is an element that makes this investment less efficient. Again, let's get back to the Draghi report. There are a few positive signals. I tend to see the glass more full than empty. Europe has made a few progress in the last few months in terms of simplification. We need today to take it a step further. Today, we need work, we need engineers, qualified engineers. We need to transform our work model to make sure that it can support this energy transition. And if I can make a last comment on productivity to raise a concern, it's the adoption of AI. It's something that we follow very closely when you're in the energy sector, between those who install data centers to develop applications of AI and those who produce energy for the same data centers. There's a very strong relationship. So we are in a very good place to watch how this AI deployed throughout the world, and this is quite a worrying picture. If we look at last year, 2024, 45% of the energy provided to the data center was done in the US, 15% in Europe, 25% in China. We're lagging behind. If you look at it, it's even more scary. The investment considered in the US on AI in how to treat the data and how to provide the tools to manage the data is 10 times more important than those that we see in Europe. And we have a risk here of lagging behind in the onboarding of these technologies that is going to impact our productivity in the companies because to deploy AI applications, it's exactly what you mentioned. The rigidity efforts, there's a difficulty to create conditions for dialogue with the stakeholders that would accelerate the implementation of these technologies. And there's a real risk of international organizations where the decision makers make choices between different regions of the world. There's a real risk that is if Europe does not make more efficient the implementation of its tools, actors will favor other regions for their actions, for their operations. So this is really something to watch for us. We need to be capable to adapt to transformations of our industrial system that are major. Yes. It's a very important point that Pierre-Olivier brought up, is that you're relaying, is if there's some blockages in the labor market, which is the case in France, we know it, and also in Europe, it's also going to block the deployment of AI. So I see Pierre MENEGAUX who is nodding. So this is something that we don't always get. Yes, and it shows in our negotiations with the social partners. It is a topic that they should harness when we talk with the trade union leaders or the organizations. It's very hard for us to mobilize them on this topic. They fear getting into this debate, and they don't look at it in a pragmatic way. And I'm not sure they consider that AI is going to destroy lots of jobs, but it's going to transform it. So we need to take care of those transformations. Do you agree with that, Pierre MENEGAUX, in your industry, which is heavy industry? Yes, there are several things that was said that I fully agree on. I would like to go back on a few fundamental notions that are the convictions at the Michelin group. The human capital is a major asset of a healthy company, or of any company, by the way. And keeping up this human capital is a fundamental lever. To do that, we need to train the human capital, teach them to face reality. And this is not easy. In every kind of reality, if we're just scaring off people and to keep things as they are, it's completely disruptive. The other thing is we need to pay correctly the people, And there's a form of social misery that is emerging in the world when we try to do productivity by dropping the price of work, of labor. And this is really bad for social capital. It's the major stake of our societies today, yesterday, and tomorrow. The third belief that we have is technology is perfectly compatible with social unity and cohesion, a smooth, good developing of individuals. But the productivity is fundamental, particularly in Europe. Let's not forget that Europe was supported in its economic growth by demographic growth as well. And in front of us, we can see very soon a degrowth in terms of demography. We're going to lose 2 million workers per year in very little time. And the productivity is going to become the essential factor of economic growth. So let's not be afraid. And I know that you're going to ask me the question, so I'm going to answer it right away. At Michelin, we have what we call the decent wage. All the employees have a minimum wage everywhere in the world because the labor has to compensate at a minimum level a person so they can grow. If you maintain individuals in a situation of precarity with their labor, you stop their capacity to innovate and to get productivity gains. So that could end up in closing of factories. So it's not about should we close down factories or not. It's how should we do it? We should support the employees at the same time. We should entrust them on finding another job again. In the latest social plans that we had, I would say about 80% of the employees have already found a new job because they were very well trained, because they're very committed, and the companies want to recruit them. Sometimes it's difficult to understand. You understand? You agree? It seems difficult, but at Michelin, the engagement rate is progressing, and it's a fundamental factor of the growth of the group. Esther DUFLO, on the question of a decent wage that François Michelin put in place. Oops, it's very hot in here. I'm sorry. It's not. I'm not. I'm Florent MENEGAUX. I'm not Florent Michelin. Florent MENEGAUX. From Michelin, of course. My mistake. My bad. Is it something that seems absolutely necessary to you in this idea of progress and breakdown between capital and work and labor? I would like to comment exactly what he said. The conversation that we've had just before he took the floor, was a bit surreal because it's a conversation that we could have had in the 90s or the years 2000. Maybe in the Obama period in the US, where we felt like productivity was on the rise, everything was going well, business was thriving. In the US, innovation, productivity, and all of this was going the right way. But today, to have the same conversation when the US is actually getting degraded every day in front of our eyes, we cannot just say, oh, it's a shame that the data centers are installed in the US and not in Europe. We could see that there's a logic behind it. There's an economic and political logic that is taking place in the US that is attracting, driving them in a wall. And they may have even got into the wall with this big, beautiful bill of yesterday, where there's some very short-term incentives for companies, taxes, and it's all about investing machines to replace humans because machines cost less, and they have tax bonuses if they do that. Tax breaks, and because machines cost less and they don't take sick leave and etc. or minimum wages, but at the end of the day, it doesn't work. And what we see today in the US is not an accident. It's a product of this degrading of social cohesion, which is due to the fact that the wages, the medium wages in the US is not good. No, it's the result of a vote, right? Yes, but this vote comes from old processes, probably even older than the drop of productivity in Europe. So if we say today that the French are conservative and the Americans, and they don't want to have anything to do with AI, well, it's not surprising because there's a concern. And it's not, there's a possibility, a likelihood that AI will replace labor. And if AI replaces labor, it either means that there will be less employed people, or it will reduce the wages. It happened before. We've heard about this fight about not wanting to be replaced by machines. The reality is that wages in England of qualified employees have not picked up in 100 years. It took them 100 years to get back to the stage where they were before the development of the technology. It's a long time. It's longer than the life of one person. So if you look at the people, whose job we're talking about, it's not obvious that it's acceptable as a trade-off. It doesn't mean that it's going to happen this way. AI can very well act as a complement to labor, or replace some forms of labor. It depends for what. It depends on the decisions. It depends on the course that we want to take. And how we're going to decide to use AI. My colleague Darren Asimoglu said it, the danger for companies, particularly for companies that have a tax more in favor of capital than labor. We're going to replace more and more work, so we're going to adopt AI technologies that will not really increase the total productivity, but that allow us to replace people by machines. It's very interesting. Everybody wants to say a word. Pierre-Olivier, Jean-Pierre, CLAMADIEU, Florent, MENEGAUX, and Patrick ARTUS. Just a word on AI. It's a huge opportunity, and it's a huge risk at the same time on the stability and the functioning of our societies and our work market. We looked at the impact that AI could have on the work market, the labor market in a number of countries, and we studied it by wondering, this exactly in the words that Esther mentioned, how can AI substitute itself to labor, or how can it complete or come on top of labor? And this is not. We should really look at the tasks. We should really study the number of tasks and the type of tasks that are done. Are they likely to be replaced by an algorithm, or they can be increased by an algorithm? And it's not only a technological decision, it's also a decision that reflects society's choices. We can very well imagine an algorithm that could absorb all the laws of a country, and it's absolutely easy to understand. If we want to have a mechanical justice, it's easy to imagine that, but we want to keep the justice human. We don't want to replace a judge by an algorithm. If we give an algorithm to a judge, it will help him do his job. If, for example, somebody who's going to do a job of research, legal research, maybe we could replace that person. So if you look at that, we see that it's about 50-50. In economies that are advanced, 50% of the workers are exposed to AI, and half of the 60%, is going to have a substitution effect for some and a complementary effect for others. So there are some risks and there are some real opportunities. The second point, this is a snapshot at the moment. What we also know, when there's some technological evolution, such as for AI, we saw it with the onboarding of all the IT technologies, is that the future jobs don't exist yet. They will emerge coming from the technological frontier that will be taking place. 50% of jobs that exist today didn't exist 50 years ago because the technology didn't let them be. So we need to see the impact of the technology and how it's going to transform labor. And we need to support employees so they can benefit from those technologies as much as they can, or take advantage of all these new functionalities that are going to appear, and so they can find a job in this field. So this is an image that is quite dynamic. We should not look at it in a very static way. So Florent MENEGAUX, Patrick ARTUS, I fully agree with what was said. At Michelin, we told everyone that AI is like a hammer. It could be the best one or not. It's a tool that allowed man to do a lot of things, so it could be a very destructive weapon. It depends on the way the humans interact with technology. So in this case, technology is very powerful, so it's a very powerful hammer. It's just a matter of how you deal with this technology and what do you want to do with it. So we want to use this technology not to replace work, but to allow labor to be more interesting, to be more diversified, more developed, and to give access to more people. We need to train better people. We need to help. The more we adopt AI, the more we're going to have to train the people. We're going to use them on fundamental notions, train their judgment, avoid saying that these technologies bring the truth. It could be a massive tool of manipulation. The challenge here, by onboarding this technology, we shouldn't refuse the technology by saying it's dangerous, or we should adopt it massively, but develop on the side some mechanisms to allow humans to adapt to those. And at Michelin, we created a manufacture of talents. We spend twice more in training by year than any company of the same level, because we understood that. And we tell all the people who will work on AI, there's 100 people who work on AI at Michelin. AI is irrigating all jobs, but it's very peaceful socially because we don't present it as a way to substitute work, but to augment work, in fact. So we train massively people, and we have the same effort to make with society. We need to retrain people at a younger age so they have a relationship with this tool, with a personal reflection, with a personal thinking. We've also developed an ethic code. We say that when somebody makes a decision, even if compared to a machine who would make the decision, it's the individual that comes first. And even if he makes a mistake, we'll tell the individual, you did the right thing by exerting your judgment. It didn't work out, or it did, but we'll try to think why you didn't use the machine to form your decision, but you did right by trying to form your own decision. The human being has to stay at the center. Jean-Pierre CLAMADIEU, to answer what Esther said, I'm not fascinated by what's happening in the US, far from it, but on digital and AI, a lot of resources are employed in this part of the world, and Europe should not lag behind. That's why I was making that comment. On the application of AI, we have a very similar approach than what Florent said. AI for us is not about replacing jobs, is allowing our teams to work better, allowing the teams who are on our platforms with client relationship platform to bring the right answers to the client right away, to the technicians to do installation, to have immediately the information that allow them to work better and more efficiently. The challenges are around training, initial training, which is a topic in our country, as in many countries, capacity to help our team members to evolve, and we put a lot of means at the disposal. The challenge is not to reduce the number of jobs, it's to make sure that we work better and more efficiently. in front of us, sometimes we have people who are very rigid and they say we don't want anything to move. We need to be able to have open discussions on this. Sometimes it starts a lot with cutting jobs, and that's why people get a bit concerned. Well, it starts with a transformation, Hedwige. It's not only job cutting, it's a transformation. And that's why it's difficult today to make people understand. In our industries, it's very difficult to recruit. We don't find qualified workers. Patrick Artus, I think we're running out of time. So, Patrick, do you want to say what? Yes, 2 points. I agree with Esther that the real danger is the concentration of companies, and that actually generates concentration of richness. Because why? Because if there was only a small number of companies, in the US there's 4 or 5 companies that provide 90%, that represent 90% of the budget for AI. And that's 60% of the world investment in the US. And it's done by 5 companies in the US. So we could say that they overinvest because they're competing each other. But the result is that these companies are going to develop some positions of monopoly. And we know there's been a lot of works on that. The more monopolistic companies you have in a country, the more growth slows down and the more productivity slows down, because these investments become defensive investments that prevent people to take their share of the market. And second, this concentration of companies means that there's an increased concentration of richness. And concentration of riches is not good, because if all the richness of the world belongs to one person, it's only the ideas of this person who will be implemented. So it would be a good idea to distribute the richness to more people, to more different people, so they can innovate and create companies. That's the first point. We need to fight against the natural movement, which is this concentration of the power of companies and richness. Second point, there are some European countries that managed to deal with that. Denmark, for example. We talk a lot about flex security in Denmark, but it's very efficient. In Denmark, there's no protection, job protection, very little. The companies can fire people as they want, but there's a very strong protection of people, of the person. And as soon as you lose your job, you're taken care in a vocational training, and in 4 months you get back to finding a new job. Versus in the delay in France, if somebody loses a job, they stay over a year unemployed. So this system of professional training means that a lot of Danish people actually leave their job to find something better, because the labor market is fluid. So we should try to go down that route. We have 5 minutes left, so I'm sorry, I'm speeding up a bit. Just a word of conclusion, maybe for each of you. Esther DUFLO, we'll start with you, then Patrick Artus. How do you combine your demonstration with democracy? You said it's coming from a vote, but how do you combine both? We could hear the consequences of the concentration of richness in a very small number of people in the US. And you could say that they all have, well, just to name it, Elon Musk, you know, he's very narrow-minded. So, and that he played a huge role in the election of Donald Trump. And then he put his ideas in practice and these ideas are quite different, to say the least. What one word? We cannot, this is just to back what he said, we cannot let the natural flow of concentration of richness and concentration of power in the hands of a very small number of people. We need to reshuffle it. It's like the GAFA leaders of today. We should worry about this over-investing in technology by a very small number of people, which either don't share at all your idea that humans should stay at the center. I was at a conference by Amazon with by engineers, Amazon engineers. Themselves, they're worried because what they do in their job is they invent or they produce bots of AI to buy things on Amazon. So basically, the bots are buying things on Amazon that are sold by other bots, and they could see the whole of Amazon going in some weird space where there's no humans anymore. So we need to I have a big stop sign in front of me. A word, Pierre-Olivier, Jean-Pierre and Florent, very quickly. Very quickly, to go back on the question of what is to be done in Europe. Integration of the unique single market, integration of a capital market, absolutely necessary to develop VC and financing of startups, etc. Research and development budget, absolutely fundamental as well. Jean-Pierre CLAMADIEU, I would say only our role as a business leader is to conduct this transformation while preserving social cohesion in our companies, but also in the countries in which we operate. Florent? Yeah, I can only agree. Social cohesion is a major challenge for the years to come. And we need to be confident to do that, to accomplish that. We need to work a lot to help people, and particularly our employees, to be confident in themselves. And that's going to help us build the future that we need. So trust yourself and have a great day.
Si.
Thank you.